The evening was calm, with the sky painted in shades of orange and purple as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The neighborhood seemed peaceful, almost picture-perfect, with its neatly trimmed lawns and rows of houses standing quietly under the fading light. Marcus Johnson, a tall man in his early 30s, stepped out of his car after a long day at work. He exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the week slowly lift off his shoulders. This was his sanctuary, his home, a place he had worked tirelessly to afford. It wasn't just a house. It represented years of sacrifice, late nights studying for his law degree, and countless hours proving himself in a world that often doubted him. As Marcus walked toward the front door, he noticed something unusual. One of the porch lights wasn't working, leaving part of the entrance dimly lit. He frowned slightly but shrugged it off, figuring he'd replace the bulb over the weekend. His keys jingled softly in his hand as he approached the lock. For a brief moment, everything felt normal. The cool breeze brushing against his face, the distant sound of birds chirping their final songs before nightfall. But little did Marcus know, this simple act of unlocking his own door would soon become anything but ordinary. A few houses down, Karen Whitaker stood at her kitchen sink, absently scrubbing a plate while glancing outside. Her eyes landed on Marcus, who was now fumbling slightly with his keys. She paused mid-scrub, narrowing her gaze. Who was this man? She didn't recognize him, and that made her uneasy. To Karen, the neighborhood was supposed to be predictable, safe, and familiar. Strangers didn't just show up here. Not like this. And yet there he was, standing in front of what appeared to be someone's house, struggling with the key. Karen's mind raced. Was he trying to break in? Why else would someone have trouble with the lock? She leaned closer to the window, squinting, as if that might give her answers. Her heart started pounding faster, though she couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was the way he looked, or maybe it was because she hadn't seen him around before. Either way, Karen convinced herself that something wasn't right. She told herself she was being vigilant, doing her duty as a responsible neighbor. After all, it was better to be safe than sorry. But what Karen failed to consider was how quickly assumptions could spiral out of control. She didn't know Marcus, nor did she bother to ask questions or seek clarification. Instead, fear took hold, clouding her judgment. As Marcus finally managed to unlock the door and step inside, completely unaware of the storm brewing nearby, Karen reached for her phone. With trembling fingers, she dialed a number she hoped would resolve the situation, but one that would instead set off a chain of events neither of them could have anticipated. What happened next would test not only Marcus's patience but also the fragile trust between neighbors and the justice system itself. Little did anyone know this quiet Friday evening was about to become unforgettable, for reasons no one saw coming. Karen's fingers hovered over the numbers on her phone as she stood by the window, her mind racing with thoughts. She glanced. Outside again, her eyes fixed on Marcus, who had finally disappeared inside the house. The porch light was still out, casting a shadow over the entrance, and the scene felt wrong to her, too quiet, too unfamiliar. Her heart thudded in her chest and she tried to shake off the unease creeping up on her. Maybe I'm overreacting, she muttered under her breath, staring at the phone in her hand. But then again, what if she wasn't? What if something bad was happening right under her nose? She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself down. After all, she had always prided herself on being the kind of neighbor who looked out for everyone. She baked cookies during the holidays, waved hello when people passed by, and kept an eye on things when others were away. Wasn't this just part of being a good citizen? If something suspicious was going on, didn't she have a responsibility to act? These questions swirled in her head, justifying her next move before she even made it. With a shaky hand, Karen dialed. "Sure, son." The operator answered almost immediately, their voice calm and professional. "What's your emergency?" they asked. Karen hesitated for a moment, clutching the phone tightly. She stared out the window again as though hoping Marcus might reappear and prove her fears unfounded. But the house remained still, its front door closed, its silence unbroken. There's a man trying to get into a house on our street," Karen began, her voice wavering slightly. She cleared her throat, trying to sound more confident than she felt. He looked suspicious. The operator's tone shifted ever so slightly, becoming more alert. Can you describe him? Karen glanced outside once more, though she couldn't see anything now. He's black, she said, her words slow and deliberate. And he was having trouble with the lock. Like, maybe he didn't belong there. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Do you know whose house it is? The operator asked. Karen bit her lip, uncertainty flickering across her face. She hadn't thought to check. In fact, she realized she didn't even know who lived in that particular house. It had been empty for a while, or so she assumed. But surely if someone owned it, they wouldn't be fumbling with the keys like that, right? I'm not sure, she admitted reluctantly. But it just seemed off. The operator thanked her for the information and assured her that officers would be sent to investigate. As Karen hung up the phone, a wave of conflicting emotions washed over her. On one hand, she felt a sense of relief, as though she had done her part to keep the neighborhood safe. On the other hand, doubt gnawed at her. Had she jumped to conclusions too quickly? What if the man really did live there? What if she had just caused unnecessary trouble for someone? She walked back to the sink, resuming her dishwashing absent-mindedly. The water ran cold against her hands, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts kept circling back to the call she had made. She told herself she was doing the right thing, that it was better to err on the side of caution. But a tiny voice in the back of her mind whispered otherwise. Outside, the evening grew darker, the shadows stretching longer across the lawns. Unbeknownst to Karen, her decision was about to set off a chain reaction that would ripple through the neighborhood and change lives forever. For now, though, all she could do was wait, her stomach twisting with a mix of guilt and anticipation. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. This quiet Friday night would not end quietly. It didn't take long for the sound of sirens to pierce the calm evening air. Marcus had just settled into his living room, tossing his briefcase onto the coffee table and loosening his tie when he heard it. At first, the distant wail was faint, almost blending with the hum of the neighborhood, but as it grew louder, unmistakable and urgent, a knot formed in his stomach. He froze, his instincts kicking in immediately. Something wasn't right. Peering through the blinds, Marcus's heart sank as he saw the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the houses across the street. 2 police cars had pulled up behind his own vehicle, their presence dominating the otherwise peaceful scene. One officer stepped out cautiously, his hand resting near the holster of his gun, while the other stayed back, speaking into a radio. Marcus watched them intently, his mind racing. Why were they here? What could they possibly want? For a moment, fear gripped him. He knew this feeling all too well. The sinking realization that his mere existence in certain spaces often invited suspicion. It wasn't the first time he'd been made to feel like an outsider in places where he rightfully belonged. But this felt different. This was his home, his sanctuary. And yet here he was again, forced to prove himself, to justify why. He was standing on ground he had every legal and moral right to stand on. Before panic could fully take hold, Marcus grabbed his phone. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through his contacts, landing on a name that brought him a sliver, of comfort. Elijah Carter. Not only was Elijah his brother-in-law, but he was also one of the sharpest lawyers in the city, known for taking on cases involving racial injustice. Marcus pressed the call button, exhaling sharply as the line began to ring. Elijah, Marcus said quickly when his brother-in-law answered, his voice low but steady. I need your help. The police are outside my house. I think someone called them on me. There was a brief pause on the other end before Elijah responded, his tone sharp and focused. Stay calm, Marcus. Don't say anything until I get there. Do you hear me? Marcus nodded, even though Elijah couldn't see him. I hear you. I'm close by, Elijah continued. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Just keep quiet and don't open the door unless they force their way in. Relief washed over Marcus, albeit briefly. Knowing Elijah was on his way gave him a small sense of control in an otherwise chaotic situation. Still, the weight of what was happening pressed heavily on his chest. He glanced out the window again, watching as the officer approached his front door. Each step the man took seemed deliberate, calculated, a reminder of the power dynamics at play. Meanwhile, Elijah's car sped through the streets, his mind working overtime. He had seen situations like this unfold far too many times before. Innocent people, black men especially, were often treated as guilty until proven otherwise, their lives disrupted simply because someone decided they looked out of place. As he drove, Elijah clenched the steering wheel tightly, determination burning in his eyes. Tonight wasn't going to end the way these stories usually did, not if he had anything to say about it. Back at the house, the officer knocked firmly on the door, his voice carrying through the wood. "Hello? Is anyone home?" Marcus hesitated, gripping the edge of the curtain. He wanted to respond, to explain that this was his house, that he hadn't done anything wrong. But Elijah's words echoed in his mind. "Don't say anything." So instead he remained silent, waiting, for the officer, for Elijah, for whatever came next. The tension in the air was palpable, stretching endlessly between each passing second. Outside, the officers exchanged glances, unsure of what awaited them inside. Inside, Marcus stood frozen, caught between indignation and fear. And, somewhere down the street, Karen peeked out from behind her curtains, her earlier confidence replaced by mounting dread. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear. This quiet suburban neighborhood would never be the same again. The sound of tires rolling smoothly over pavement broke the tense silence that had settled outside Marcus's house. A sleek black sedan pulled up directly in front of the scene, its arrival commanding attention. The officers standing near the door paused mid-conversation, their heads turning toward the new development. From the driver's seat emerged Elijah Carter, every inch of him exuding confidence and authority. Dressed in a sharp charcoal suit with a crisp white shirt, he moved with purpose, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement as he strode. Toward the group, Elijah didn't waste time with pleasantries. He approached the officers with an air of calm determination, extending a hand while introducing himself. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I'm Elijah Carter, legal counsel for Marcus Johnson, the homeowner." His words hung in the air like a challenge, forcing the officers to recalibrate their approach. They exchanged quick glances, clearly unprepared for this twist. Lawyers typically didn't show up so quickly or at all in situations like this. One of the officers, a taller man with graying hair, stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, we're just investigating a report about a potential break-in," he explained, his tone measured but tinged with defensiveness. "We're trying to ensure everyone's safety." Elijah raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "A potential break-in," he repeated, letting the skepticism seep into his voice. "And who made this report? Do you have any evidence to support it?" The officer hesitated, caught off guard by the directness of the question. "We received a call from a concerned citizen," he replied vaguely, avoiding specifics. "We're simply following protocol." "Protocol," Elijah echoed, his tone dripping with quiet disdain. Interesting choice of words. He glanced toward the house, then back at the officers. "My client is inside. He owns this property. I'd like to see the basis for your investigation before we proceed further." The second officer, younger and visibly uneasy, chimed in nervously. "We haven't done anything wrong here, sir. We're just doing our jobs." "And my job," Elijah countered smoothly, "is to ensure that my client's rights aren't violated in the process. So let's start with the basics. Can you confirm whether the caller identified themselves or provided credible information? Or are we dealing with yet another case of racial profiling masquerading as concern?" The accusation landed like a punch, leaving both officers momentarily speechless. They shifted uncomfortably, aware that the situation had escalated beyond a routine check. One of them reached for his radio, likely calling for backup or guidance, while the other attempted to regain control of the conversation. Look, Mr. Carter, no one's jumping to conclusions. We're just trying to get to the bottom of this. Elijah crossed his arms, his posture unyielding. Then perhaps you should begin by speaking directly to my client instead of making assumptions based on anonymous tips, shall we? Before the officers could respond, the front door opened and Marcus stepped out onto the porch. He stood tall, his expression composed despite the storm brewing around him. Elijah turned to him briefly, nodding once, a silent signal that they were in this together. Marcus nodded back, drawing strength from his brother-in-law's presence. Officers, Marcus said evenly, addressing them for the first time. I'm Marcus Johnson, the owner of this house. I've lived here for 6 months now. Would you like to see my ID and proof of ownership? The officers exchanged another glance, their earlier certainty wavering under the weight of logic and evidence. Reluctantly, they agreed to review Marcus's documents, though their body language betrayed their discomfort. It was clear they hadn't anticipated such a swift and organized response. As Marcus handed over the paperwork, Elijah kept a watchful eye on the interaction, ensuring nothing was overlooked or mishandled. The atmosphere remained charged, but the balance of power had shifted noticeably. What had started as a potentially hostile confrontation was now transforming into something else entirely, a test of accountability, transparency, and justice. Down the street, Karen watched from her window, her face pale with growing unease. She hadn't expected things to escalate this far, nor had she imagined seeing a lawyer arrive so quickly. Her earlier bravado crumbled as reality set in. Whatever happened next, she realized, would leave a lasting mark, not just on Marcus but on the entire neighborhood. The tension on the lawn grew thicker with each passing moment, like a storm cloud refusing to break. Marcus stood confidently beside Elijah, his posture unwavering as he handed over the documents proving his ownership of the house. The officers flipped through the papers, their expressions shifting from skepticism to discomfort. They weren't used to being challenged so directly, or so effectively. With Elijah's sharp gaze fixed on them, they knew any misstep could spiral into something far bigger than a routine call. Karen, unable to stay hidden any longer, finally emerged from her house. She walked hesitantly toward the group, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as if trying to shield herself from the weight of what she'd set in motion. Her face was flushed, and her steps faltered when she saw Marcus standing there, calm, but resolute. For the first time, she truly looked at him, not as some vague, suspicious figure, but as a person, a homeowner, someone who belonged exactly where he was. Excuse me, Karen stammered, her voice barely audible over the hum of cicadas in the background. Everyone turned to look at her and she flinched under their collective stares. I just wanted to say, she trailed off, glancing nervously at the officers before locking eyes briefly with Marcus. I didn't realize it was your house. I thought, well, I wasn't sure. Elijah raised an eyebrow, his tone icy but controlled. You weren't sure? He repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. So instead of asking questions or checking with neighbors, you decided to call the police on a man simply because he didn't fit your idea of who should be here? Karen winced, visibly her cheeks burning red. It's not like that, she insisted weakly, though her voice lacked conviction. I was just worried about the neighborhood. About the neighborhood, Elijah echoed, his tone dripping with disbelief. Let's be clear about something, ma'am. Your actions tonight weren't about protecting anyone. They were rooted in bias that has consequences that can ruin lives. Marcus stepped forward then, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. Do you have any idea what it feels like to come home after a long day and find the police at your door because someone assumed you didn't belong? To feel like you're constantly fighting to prove your right to exist in spaces you've earned? Karen opened her mouth to respond but found no words. Tears welled up in her eyes as guilt washed over her. She hadn't intended for things to go this far. In her mind, she had been doing the right thing, looking out for her community. But now, faced with the reality of the harm she'd caused, she realized how misguided her intentions had been. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice cracking. I really am. I didn't mean for this to happen. Elijah sighed deeply, shaking his head. An apology isn't enough, Ms. Whitaker. Not when situations like this happen every single day to people who look like my client. What matters now is what you do next. Are you willing to learn? To understand why your assumptions were dangerous? Or will you walk away pretending nothing happened? For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were the distant chirping of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves in the night breeze. Finally, Karen nodded, her tears spilling over. I want to learn, she said softly. I don't want to make the same mistake again. Marcus studied her for a moment, searching for sincerity in her expression. He didn't owe her forgiveness. Not yet. But he chose to acknowledge her attempt at accountability. Good, he said simply. Start by listening. Really listening. With that, Elijah turned back to the officers, his demeanor still firm. Now, unless you have concrete evidence of wrongdoing, I suggest we wrap this up. My client has cooperated fully, and there's no reason for further disruption. Reluctantly, the officers agreed, packing up their equipment and preparing to leave. As they drove away, the street returned to its usual quiet, though the air felt heavier somehow. The confrontation may have ended, but its impact lingered, a reminder that even in the most ordinary places, extraordinary lessons could be learned. The next morning, the neighborhood woke up to an unexpected buzz. News of the incident had spread, like wildfire, not just through word of mouth but also online. Someone, no one was quite sure who, had posted about it on social media, sharing details that painted a vivid picture of what had unfolded. The post quickly gained traction, sparking conversations across platforms. Hashtags like Secure Justice for Marcus and Stop Racial Profiling began trending, drawing attention from people far beyond the quiet suburban streets where it all started. Marcus himself was surprised by the sudden spotlight. When he opened his phone that morning, notifications flooded in. Messages of support, solidarity, and even gratitude from strangers who saw his experience as a reflection of their own struggles. At first, he felt overwhelmed. This wasn't something he had asked for. All he'd wanted was to live peacefully in the home he worked so hard to buy. But as the messages poured in, he realized this moment could serve a greater purpose. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel out of place simply because of the color of their skin. Elijah saw the opportunity too. With Marcus's permission, he released a statement along with body cam footage captured during the confrontation. The video showed everything: the calm demeanor of Marcus, the pointed questions from Elijah, and the visible unease of both Karen and the officers. There was no yelling, no dramatic accusations, just the stark reality of how quickly assumptions could escalate into potentially dangerous situations. The clip went viral almost instantly, sparking outrage and calls for accountability. Under mounting public pressure, the police department announced an internal investigation into the officers' conduct. Community leaders demanded transparency, insisting that this incident be used as a catalyst for change, rather than swept under the rug. Meanwhile, Elijah filed formal complaints against both the responding officers and Karen, emphasizing the need for systemic reform. This isn't just about one bad call, he said during a brief press conference outside Marcus's house. It's about addressing the biases that allow these incidents to happen in the first place. Karen, meanwhile, found herself at the center of a storm she hadn't anticipated. Friends and neighbors approached her cautiously, some offering sympathy while others expressed disappointment. Online, her name became synonymous with ignorance and prejudice, though many commenters acknowledged her apology as a starting point. She spent hours sitting alone in her living room, replaying the events of the previous night in her mind. Guilt gnawed at her relentlessly, but so did a newfound determination to educate herself. She began reading articles, watching documentaries, and attending virtual workshops on racial equity. It wasn't enough to erase what she'd done, but it was a step toward becoming part of the solution. As days passed, local news outlets picked up the story, amplifying its reach even further. Reporters camped outside Marcus's house, eager for interviews, but he declined most requests. Instead, he chose to channel his energy into something constructive. Inspired by the outpouring of support, Marcus decided to host a community meeting, not to dwell on anger or blame, but to foster understanding and healing. Flyers appeared around the neighborhood, inviting residents to come together and discuss ways to build trust and inclusivity. What had begun as a simple attempt to enter his own home had transformed into a movement. Marcus knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Real change never was. But as he stood on his porch once again, looking out at the street now buzzing with activity, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this moment could spark something bigger, a shift toward a future where everyone truly belonged. The community meeting was held in the local recreation center, a spacious hall with high ceilings and rows of folding chairs arranged in a semicircle. Word had spread quickly, drawing not only neighbors but also activists, journalists, and city officials eager to hear what Marcus had to say. The room buzzed with quiet conversation as people filed in, some clutching notebooks, others holding cups of coffee. Despite the diversity of those gathered, there was a shared sense of anticipation and unease. Everyone knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary town hall. Marcus stood at the front of the room, flanked by Elijah, who offered silent support. For a moment, Marcus simply looked out at the crowd, taking it all in. He saw familiar faces, neighbors he passed on his morning walks, and unfamiliar ones, people from other parts of the city who had come to listen and learn. His heart raced, but he reminded himself why he was doing this. This wasn't about revenge or pointing fingers. It was about creating space for honest dialogue. "Thank you all for being here," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I didn't expect my story to become public, let alone spark this kind of conversation. But now that it has, I want us to use it as an opportunity to talk openly about the biases we carry, the harm they can cause, and how we can do better." His words resonated immediately, prompting nods and murmurs of agreement throughout the room. One by one, attendees were invited to share their thoughts. Some spoke passionately about their own experiences with racial profiling, recounting moments when they'd felt judged or targeted because of their appearance. Others admitted to harboring unconscious biases, expressing regret while vowing to unlearn harmful stereotypes. Each story added depth to the discussion, making it clear that no one was immune to the effects of systemic prejudice. Karen attended too, slipping into a seat near the back of the room. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact, but listened intently as speaker after speaker addressed the group. When it came time for her to speak, she hesitated, her hands trembling as she gripped the microphone. I don't know where to start," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I did was wrong. I see that now. I let fear and ignorance guide me instead of curiosity or compassion, and I'm so sorry." Her apology hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. The room fell silent, the weight of her admission palpable. Marcus watched her carefully, noting the sincerity in her tone. While forgiveness wouldn't come overnight, he appreciated her willingness to step forward and acknowledge her role in the incident. Elijah took the stage next, delivering a powerful speech about accountability and action. "Awareness is important," he said, pacing slowly across the floor. "But awareness alone isn't enough. We need policies that address systemic inequities. We need training programs that teach empathy and critical thinking. And most importantly, we need communities that hold each other accountable, not out of judgment but out of love." By the end of the evening, several initiatives had been proposed: workshops on implicit bias, neighborhood patrols led by residents rather than police, and mentorship programs connecting younger generations with leaders like Marcus and Elijah. As people left the hall exchanging contact information and promising to stay involved, there was a palpable sense of hope. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but the seeds had been planted. For Marcus, the meeting marked a turning point, not just for him personally but for the entire community. It proved that even in the face of division, progress was possible if people were willing to listen, reflect, and act. In the weeks that followed the community meeting, the neighborhood began to transform in subtle but meaningful ways. The police, Department implemented new training programs focused on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. Officers were required to attend workshops led by experts in racial equity, learning how to approach situations with empathy rather than assumption. Flyers about these changes were posted around town, signaling a commitment to growth, a small step toward rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the community. Karen, too, kept her promise to educate herself. She joined a local book club, dedicated to discussing issues of race and privilege, reading works by authors who challenged her perspective. At first she felt out of place, unsure of what to say during discussions. But over time she found her voice, asking questions and listening intently to the experiences of others. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Some neighbors, initially hesitant to forgive her, began to see her attempts at change as genuine. Though reconciliation was slow, it was happening, one conversation at a time. For Marcus, life returned to a semblance of normalcy, though he carried the lessons from that night with him everywhere he went. He became more vocal in his advocacy, work, partnering with Elijah to establish a non-profit organization aimed at empowering marginalized communities. Together, they hosted seminars, distributed resources, and created mentorship opportunities for young Black professionals striving to break barriers in their fields. What started as a personal ordeal had blossomed into something far greater, a movement rooted in resilience and hope. The media continued to cover Marcus's story, highlighting not just the incident itself, but also the positive ripple effects it sparked. Journalists praised the way the community came together, using adversity as a catalyst for progress. Marcus gave a few carefully chosen interviews, always steering the narrative back to collective action rather than individual blame. "This isn't about me," he would say firmly. "It's about all of us working together to create a world where everyone feels safe and valued." One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus stood on his porch, sipping a cup of tea. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. He looked out at the street, now illuminated by newly installed solar-powered lights, a project spearheaded by the neighborhood association after discussions at the town hall. Children played nearby, laughing as they chased each other across lawns. Neighbors waved hello, their smiles warmer, their greetings more intentional. Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought about how far he'd come since that fateful Friday night. The fear, the frustration, the fight for justice. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. This quiet suburban street, once a symbol of exclusion, now felt like home, not just for him, but for everyone who called it theirs. As he turned to go inside, Elijah pulled up in his car, rolling down the window with a grin. "How's it going, hero?" he teased, though there was pride in his tone. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm no hero," he replied. "Just a guy trying to make things better, for myself, for my family, and for anyone else who deserves to feel like they belong." Elijah nodded, his smile widening. "Well, you're doing a damn good job of it." With that, Marcus headed indoors, leaving behind the porch light glowing brightly against the darkening sky. The road ahead still held challenges, but for the first time in a long while he felt hopeful. Change was possible, and it started right here, in this little corner of the world, where ordinary people chose to stand up, speak out, and build bridges instead of walls.